Well, thanks so much for coming out. I wanted to start with just kind of the obvious introductory question. Can you tell us kind of who you are, the area you represent, and how long you've been involved in the political scene here in Colorado?
Well, the V has just moved out of our neighborhood a few years ago, but I live in Arvada, or it's between Arvada and Golden. Lived in Jefferson County my whole life. My wife's a teacher. She taught at Pomona. She teaches at Stanley Lake. I practiced law I went to undergrad at Boulder and law school at CU, and then go Buffs, and practiced law for 25 years before I was elected to Congress. And so lived in Wheat Ridge, Golden, Arvada area my whole life. I'm now serving in my 7th term. So I represent the 7th Congressional District, which is the north half of Jefferson County, west half of Adams County. First Democrat to represent that district. And you know, my wife and I, between us, we have 6 kids. They're all, 5 of them are in Colorado, one's in New York, and I'm going to officiate the wedding of our youngest daughter a week from Saturday. So that's how it goes.
And just visually, when I was looking up your district, it's kind of, if Denver's in the center, it circles around the northern and western part. So it's kind of between here and the mountains, up to Arvada. That's kind of the direction.
So
right?
it's everything between Denver and Boulder, Denver and Broomfield. So it's the western and northern suburbs of the Denver area, and we go up into the mountains up Coal Creek. And so I have some mountains, but you know, a very suburban district, you know, right down the middle politically, right down the middle financially. Big growth in the area. So when the district was drawn back in 2010, 2012 with the census then, we had about 700,000 people in the district, and we're now at about 820. And the Boulder district, where Joe Neguse is, has gone from 700 to 930. So in Colorado, we're going to get at least one more congressional district with the next census in 2020.
And so you're here tonight largely, or we know you from this industry largely from the Safe Banking Act. So how much have you been involved in cannabis as an issue? I know you have some other issues like clean energy and job creation, but you know, what made you start getting into
little ones like that?
Yeah, just little clean energy issues that get that cleaned up for us. But how did you first come to get involved in cannabis issues? What did you feel about Amendment 64 when it came across? And you know, what led to being involved with the Safe Banking Act now?
So I served in the state senate for 2 terms, and actually the first time I dealt with cannabis-related matters was dealing with, there were like these stamps that were a part of, I don't know, some program that we had that related to marijuana in some fashion or another. Anyway, we had all this supposed value in these stamps, but they had never been valued, or we never tried to enforce it or collect against it. So I was just trying to clean up some laws that were not working very well. I supported the medical marijuana initiative early on. I remember I had a friend, a guy named Jack War, who really wanted me to get involved in sort of cannabis, THC-related things. He was very much against the war on drugs. And so kind of cognizant to that, there was a federal judge, John Kane, who had the same kind of approach to this thing. So I was watching it closely. When 64 came up, though, I did not support it. There were sort of 10 people, let's say. My mom, my dad, my wife, me, our 6 kids. So of the 10 of us, my dad and I did not support it, and the other 8 did. And I said, okay, this thing's going to pass, and it certainly passed. And when it did, Barney Frank, I serve on the Financial Services Committee in the House of Representatives. I'm also on the Science Committee and another committee called the Rules Committee. But Barney and I were talking and said, okay, with Colorado leading the way on this thing, you now have to undertake sort of the banking aspects of this, because the federal law under the Controlled Substance Act says, you know, anything with THC is illegal for all purposes, and you could bet that bankers, because it's a federal banking system, adhere to that, because they could be you know, the president of the bank or the cashier or anybody else could get in trouble for laundering money. And that obviously carries with it some pretty stiff sentences. And that's how I got involved. So I started the Safe Banking Act, or I don't know what we called it back then, about 6 years ago. And have been working on it ever since. And now it's actually starting to move. When I first started it, and you know, you all can relate to this a little bit, I brought it up, and the chairman of the committee was a guy, a Republican named Jeb Henserling, and he just wouldn't let me have a hearing, wouldn't let the bill come up for a vote, nothing. But I would bring it up whenever I had a chance to speak, and they all sort of chuckled when, you know, I bring up anything related to marijuana. You know, oh yeah, Rocky Mountain High, all that sort of stuff. Well, after a while, they stopped chuckling, and they realized I was serious, and that this was a serious issue because so much cash is created, and the potential for somebody getting harmed is real. In fact, we've had a murder, we've had robberies, we've had all that stuff. So there was a real public safety aspect to this that everybody began to take seriously. And this year, when Democrats won the House, the chairwoman of the committee, Maxine Waters from California, allowed me to have a hearing. We had people from all over the country testified, minority cannabis businesses, state treasurers, law enforcement, the whole range. It was really a great panel, and I think I started winning some real converts, particularly among the Republicans, to move this piece of legislation forward.
Through the testimony?
Through the testimony, it was excellent. Everybody had prepared well, and you know, I mean, because it makes sense. I mean, they're just, so the California treasurer talk about people coming in with bags and suitcases full of cash. We had this little town of Desert Hot Springs right near Palm Springs, where they have some dispensaries who came in to pay their local taxes. 2 suitcases full of cash, took them 3 days to count it. But, you know, they paid their taxes, and the city counted it, and it was a big piece of revenue for that little town.
So you mentioned bringing it up 6 years ago to begin with. Between now and then, and in the process of writing it, have there been like nuances that had to be worked out? Are there any good examples of? I feel like we get a kind of top line headline version of it, which is this is going to let banks, you know, bank this industry. Are there nuances that had to be kind of worked out, that, or was it just a matter of waiting for people to be convinced?
Both. The nuances, and so I was talking to a young woman who writes for Westwood, who's here tonight, and you all may remember, so under Obama, there was this thing called the Cole Memo. And the Cole Memo is 2 things, the Justice Department and the Treasury Department. In the Cole Memo, the guy was a guy named Cole, who was an assistant attorney general, and he wrote this memo that said, look, if there's not organized crime, if kids aren't getting their hands on marijuana or things with THC, if there's proper accounting, we in the Justice Department are not going to pursue this as a major case. We're going to, you know, allow the business to develop. And so there was the Cole Memo, and there was the FinCEN guidance, and they're the same thing. So one's in the Justice Department, the other's in the Treasury Department. So the bankers then, and they were few and far between, decided they could take advantage of these safe harbors that had been the policy. But it's just a policy, it's not the law. And when Jeff Sessions came in under Trump, he immediately revoked the Cole Memo. But the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin kept the FinCEN guidance in place, so the Treasury Department still is following these points, which has allowed banks, some small banks and credit unions, to continue to provide services. Well, I got Cole to come help me really refine the legislation.
The guy who wrote that memo?
The guy who wrote the memo, and to really remove any doubt for bankers about it being laundering money, or that they could get in trouble under the Controlled Substance Act. So we're taking a very narrow kind of focused position dealing with banking. So not broader, it doesn't help us on taxes, doesn't help with research, doesn't help with testing or sales generally. but it gets the cash off the street and allows for legitimate businesses to have legitimate banking relationships. And that's how the bill is drafted today. We've added hemp. It was not in it. There was a belief that in a bill passed late a couple years ago in session that in addition to the agriculture bill, there was this hemp kind of exemption, which has really spurred business, but the bankers are still nervous about providing banking services. So we've added hemp and a couple other things to attract more votes.
And so where is it at right now? It's out of committee, correct?
So, like I said, I hadn't had a hearing or a markup. So markup is the amending of the bill or the voting on the bill in 6 years. So we had the panel. It was an outstanding bunch that testified. We had the markup. A lot of amendments were thrown at me, a lot of things. But at the end of the day, it was a bipartisan vote. It was 45 to 15. 34 Democrats and 11 Republicans against 15 Republicans. And the Republican leadership in that committee was like, they couldn't believe that 11 Republicans would support this thing. Every single Democrat voted for it, but it's a bipartisan piece of legislation. So my chief sponsors with me are a guy named Denny Heck from Olympia, Washington. So Washington, obviously, very, very involved in this subject. And two Republicans, Denny's a Democrat, two Republicans from Ohio, Warren Davidson and a guy named Steve Stivers. And Warren, so Denny's coming at it from a public safety point of view. Warren is coming at it kind of from a libertarian point of view, like, okay, just let them do their business. And then Stivers, coming at it from a slightly different point of view, he has Scott's Liquid Gold or Scott's Miracle Grow or whatever the hell it is in his district, which the marijuana business, the cannabis industry, is a big customer. And so from a business perspective, one of the major employers, that's sort of where he started to pursue it. We're now at 206 co-sponsors. We think we can get upwards of, I shouldn't say this, but I'm hoping for somewhere between 250 and 300 votes. You got to get 218 to pass the House of Representatives and to send it on to the Senate. So I think we're going to be at 250 to 300. About three-quarter, two-thirds will be Democrats, a third Republican. But we have a lot of stalemates, if you will, in the Congress where there's not that kind of bipartisan support. But this has gotten that kind of bipartisan support. And then if we're lucky, or no, if we do our job, it goes to the Senate. There are 32 co-sponsors. The primary sponsors are Jeff Merkley, Senator from Oregon, and Cory Gardner from here.
We can give a round of applause for those folks. Just out of curiosity, since you mentioned two Ohio Republicans, John Boehner obviously made a lot of headlines when he joined Anchorage.
Yeah.
Does that play a role? I mean, do you hear from him specifically, or is there a force behind that?
So, for those of you, and I'm sure most everybody knows, Boehner was the Speaker of the House, Republican, very much, when he was in that position, opposed to cannabis, anything with THC. But then he left the speakership, turned it over to a guy named Paul Ryan, and when John went into the private sector, he would talk to a number of different marijuana businesses, and he decided that he wanted to support the industry. And I think, so he's from Ohio too, so I imagine that he's had some influence on these two members of Congress. He certainly is a real advocate for the industry now, and he's out and about working on it.
So you talked about it going to the Senate. Do you have, what are your hopes in the Senate right now? Obviously,
my job is to get it out of the House.
Okay.
I was helping, so before I got here, I was at the Buffalo Rose helping John Hickenlooper roll out his Senate race.
Right.
So, my job is to get it out of the House, let the senators do their thing. But I'm feeling optimistic because we have some additional components. So the hemp piece, Mitch McConnell, the Republican majority leader, he thought he covered all of the hemp issues when he stuck it in the agriculture bill a year or so ago, but it didn't completely resolve the banking component. So we've added hemp. I know I picked up a number of Republicans to vote for the bill in the House, and I think if we potentially have picked up his support, then it will really start moving. And there's a banking section 2 and 2 that we've added, and it's into the weeds, but so to speak, it doesn't. It's a banking piece that I think has attracted other votes to it as well. So I'm optimistic on the Senate side too.
If John Hickenlooper does take, what are your feelings on John Hickenlooper?
I'm supporting him.
Yeah, have you endorsed him? Is that what you're doing earlier tonight?
Yes, I've endorsed him. When he called me last summer, he said he was going to run for president. Would I support him? I said, yeah, but I want you to run for the Senate. He said, well, he wanted to run for president. And I said, okay, if that doesn't work out, please run for the Senate, because I worked with him a long time. And this isn't a John Hickenlooper show, but I felt he was a very good governor. He now is really cognizant and aware of national and international issues, and he certainly knows Colorado like the back of his hand. So I just think he'll be good. I work with Corey a lot. Corey's going to be a very tough campaigner. He's my co-sponsor on the Senate, and he's a friend of mine. But I don't like what I've seen happening in the Senate, where so many things get stalled that really have to be addressed by America.
You mentioned the hemp protections in the agriculture bill, and then the outcome not being the complete solution we thought it was. What steps have we taken to make sure the Safe Banking Act doesn't run into the same thing where technically it's on the books, but banks still are balking at the idea?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So we've worked not only with the Justice Department and FinCEN, the Treasury Department, we have worked with, so different iterations of this thing have gone to the Federal Reserve, and we've gone through it with the banking regulators, where they've made comments and changes and asked for certain things, and we've tried to accommodate all that.
Gotcha.
So, we're working with all of the interested parties and affected groups as best we can, so that you have as complete an answer as possible. So the simplest thing, but politically today, not easy, is to just take it out of Schedule 1, and just treat it like alcohol or, something like that. That is the smartest, simplest approach. But it just, if they're in effect stonewalling me for 6 years just on a narrow piece of banking, then this other stuff is hard. But I think once this bill moves, then a lot of things are going to follow. The tax piece, the 280E, research and testing, and ultimately some change to the scheduling to take it out of Schedule 1, decriminalize it, and then the question will be, are we going to do any criminal justice reform where people can have, if it was a small amount, you weren't trafficking or whatever, but you got something on your record, get that record expunged. And I know we have some district attorneys who are working on that kind of aspect today.
Although there are also good people who were trafficking. Got to keep that in mind as well. It's not just the small possessions.
All right, well, no, I hear you. Look, I just want to get my banking done.
I hear you.
Okay. Somebody else can take those others.
So does it require a congressional act to reschedule it? Or is that an executive?
It could be either. So it was scheduled by Congress. It could be descheduled by the executive branch. And we had hoped that Obama would have descheduled it, but what he did is he ordered his Justice Department and his Treasury Department to come up with those guidances so that things could move forward, but we just couldn't convince him to deschedule it.
I want to ask maybe one more question here, but I want to leave some time for audience questions as well. We can probably take 2 or 3 of those. I know the Congressman has a pretty busy schedule tonight, so I was going to ask just how much.
I talked to the National Conference of bankruptcy trustees at 7:30 tomorrow morning. So all of you should join us for that too.
I wanted to ask, how much do you hear from the industry? What do you think that we should do as an industry? Like, is our voice heard enough as much as the problems we deal with, or do we need to be more active? What do you think?
The level of maturity of this industry in your government relations has gone from down here to up here, really over the course of about 5 or 6 years. Really, from the time I started carrying the Safe Banking Act, it was very novice. And the level of professionalism and the outreach in DC and I'm sure here in Colorado to the state legislature has really improved immensely. So it's solid. Business owners such as everybody in here, are contacting their legislator, their member of Congress, their senators, and so it really becomes, not this sort of abstract thing, but you've got good people who are professional, who are constituents, who are business people saying, okay, fix this. And it's good. It's really improved a lot.
Do you see, would you like to see cannabis, like Colorado maintain its position as kind of a leader in the cannabis space? Do you think that that's an important thing? It might not be ever as big as some of the massive industries that have been here for hundreds of years with, energy that is very important, but, do you see it becoming a powerful industry and an important part of the economy here?
Yes, it is already an important part of the economy. And I see Colorado really taking leadership on this thing when we knew we were going to take some slings and arrows too. So, in the Congress, we were first, Washington was right on our heels, and now we have so many other states looking at the systems that we put in place, which haven't been perfect, but they've been pretty damn good. And so other people, they now have the opportunity to refine it, improve it, make systems work better and all that kind of stuff. But we are looked at as leaders in this thing, and we need to keep that kind of leadership approach that we've taken for so long. The business side, the compliance side, the governmental side.
Awesome. Do we have some audience questions that anyone would like to ask? Awesome. I'm going to switch microphones. All right. It's pretty loud, so you're probably keep it.
Thank you.
And tell me who you are and what you do.
Sure, my name's Sean, and I handle specialty tax incentives for businesses. My question is, if Mitch McConnell will not bring up the States Act that passed in June, and whether or not he'll address the Safe Banking Act when it's passed in the House, what would be the probability of getting the language from those two acts added to the omnibus spending bill at the end of the year to force a conversation on this and see if it stays?
All right. So the States Act is broader than the Safe Banking Act, but it doesn't really answer the questions you got to deal with on banking. So you need both of them, really. The States Act was passed as part of one of our appropriations bills, which was really pretty remarkable vote that was taken, because it's by far the broadest piece of cannabis legislation passed by the House. I think what's going to happen is our bill will pass. There will be an effort to add the States Act, maybe 280E components as well, some real specific tax things, either in the Senate or in a conference committee. I think we just got to start breaking this logjam. If a standalone piece of cannabis legislation like the Safe Banking Act comes straight out of the House and not just attached to an appropriations bill, I think things will really begin to move and to fall into place. And a number of these pieces of legislation could become one big piece of legislation that goes to the White House. So we didn't talk about the White House at all. So, the question, what is the Trump administration going to do? Well, from time to time, you don't know. From hour to hour, they don't know. But one of the individuals over there, Mick Mulvaney, who's his chief of staff and the head of the Office of Management and Budget, was my primary co-sponsor before Trump selected him to go to the White House. And so we've been talking to Mick, to make sure that the White House is prepared for this. The Treasury Department, I think Mnuchin, is ready to do something in this area. So, not only do we have to really make sure things are going well in the House, then in the Senate, but that the White House is prepared to sign the legislation. And I think those things are in place to get it done.
Anybody else have questions?
Hi, my name is, whoa, this is really loud. Hi, my name is Luke. I work for Simplifia. We help cannabis businesses do operational compliance with local regulations. So I was wondering, if the Safe Banking Act passes in its current form, will it completely nullify the FinCEN guidance and there won't be any SARs or anything like that? Okay, cool.
No, there will still, it in fact embraces and makes the law sort of that FinCEN guidance.
Awesome.
So there's still a lot of compliance. There's still got to be no mafia, no kids getting their hands on it, no, proper accounting. So those requirements are there, but they become the law and not a policy that can be revoked. And I just want to thank you. On LinkedIn, I'm getting all of these things that say your company has put out notice about this CannaGathering, and folks are, on my LinkedIn are saying, go get them, man, be there. So it's like, it's the most interesting stuff I've had on my LinkedIn in a long time.
Nice, I'll have to tell our social media.
Yeah, do
person.
it, please.
Sorry, I had a second part though.
Sure.
Did you have any opinions on the new investment rules that the MED just put into place?
No.
No.
You'd have to
Okay.
help me with that, no. There are all sorts of issues. So the bill, we started and ultimately something that could happen in the Senate to be, added to the bill would be on securities, on investments, and that is kind of addressed. So Mike asked the question, is this thing complete? As to banking and insurance and in real estate, it's pretty good. I think pretty complete. As it gets over, you move over to the investment side and securities regulation, there's a lot of open questions there.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Dave Kilroy. I'm the controller for FlexMod Solutions. We're an ancillary company. We build extraction labs and modular grow rooms. I was wondering what we can do in this industry to help support the rescheduling to a Schedule 3 versus a Schedule 1 drug to not only help eliminate some of the banking issues, but also help the testing side, the lab testing side, the research side, kind of bolster that.
So, very good question. So, let me take two steps back. So, in the Safe Banking Act, we address specifically marijuana businesses, and it's defined in the statute, and marijuana-related businesses. So, the testing, or the landlord, or the lawyer, or the accountant, and that the bank can continue to provide banking services to those ancillary industries. So we're trying to address both the marijuana business and the businesses with which it conducts business, so to speak. As this thing moves, I think we just take it completely out of the Controlled Substance Act. That would be my goal, and then create something similar to what's in the liquor industry that has